There was once a warrior who could hear the sound of a falling leaf in the midst of battle, yet could not silence the storm inside his own mind. They called him Ryujin, the Silent Edge. He had mastered every weapon, every form, every strike, yet peace remained beyond his reach. Each dawn, he rose before the sun, training until sweat became steam upon his skin. But no amount of motion brought him stillness. Then, one night, under the dim glow of paper lanterns, an old monk told him, "The greatest blade does not cut the world, it parts the chaos within." From that night, Ryujin began his journey not through mountains or wars, but through silence, discipline, and fear. A journey where stillness became sharper than steel. This is the way of Zanshin, the art of remaining present, unbroken, and aware, even when the world trembles. The clang of steel split the dawn. A dozen men charged through the fog, their war cries shattering the fragile stillness that hung between the pines. Ryujin met them head-on. His blade was a storm, swift, merciless, precise. Each strike found its mark, each parry born of instinct sharpened by years of survival. But beneath the rhythm of battle, there was a noise that no sword could silence, the roar of his own mind. Faster. Stronger. Don't falter. His breath burned in his chest as he cut down another opponent. Blood spattered across his cheek, warm, fleeting. He felt alive, but not awake. Victory, though near, brought no peace, only a tightening in his chest, a craving that even triumph could not feed. When the last enemy fell, the world grew still again. The battlefield lay strewn with broken armor and broken men. Crows circled above, their shadows sliding over the bodies like whispers of judgment. Ryujin sheathed his blade. The weight of silence pressed against him harder than any foe. His general's voice broke through the haze. "You fought well, Ryujin. You've earned rest." But Ryujin did not hear him. He stood staring at his reflection in a puddle darkened with blood. The water trembled from the faint wind, his image distorted, hollow. He wondered if this endless fight for dominance, was strength, or a sickness disguised as glory. That night, as the campfire cracked and warriors drank in celebration, Ryujin sat apart. The laughter around him sounded distant, a language he no longer understood. The noise outside mirrored the noise within. He closed his eyes. At first, he found only chaos. Memories collided, every wound, every command, every moment of fear masquerading as fury. He tried to breathe through it. But silence felt unbearable, like drowning in still water. In the darkness behind his eyelids, an image formed, a monk, years ago, standing at the temple gate Ryujin once passed as a child. The man had said, "To master others is power. To master oneself is peace." At the time, Ryujin had laughed. Now, those words struck harder than any sword. He looked up at the stars, infinite and indifferent. He felt small, and for the first time, unguarded. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps awakening. He couldn't tell. From somewhere beyond the camp, a faint wind whispered through the bamboo, carrying with it a tone unlike any he'd heard before, not command, not cry, but something between. A hum of stillness. He rose and walked toward the sound. Each step felt heavier than battle. Past the fires, past the laughter, into the forest where no orders existed. There, in the clearing, the moonlight fell like a blade of silver through the mist. He stood beneath it, breathing. The forest did not move to his rhythm. It moved to its own. For a long time, he listened to the wind, to the rustle of leaves, to his heartbeat slowing. The world was still loud, but now the noise was outside, not within. And in that fragile balance, between silence and sound, something began to shift. Transition. That night, Ryujin would not sleep. For the first time, he would begin to hear the voice he had spent his whole life trying to silence. The forest did not end, it deepened. Mist curled between the trunks like breath made visible, and Ryujin walked as if through a dream. Every step away from the camp felt like a step toward something ancient, something that had been waiting. He came upon a stream, its current slow, its surface reflecting the moon like a blade polished by time. Kneeling beside it, he dipped his hands into the cold water and washed the blood from his skin. The crimson swirled, then vanished, carried away by the current, leaving his reflection whole again. But the reflection was not who he remembered. His eyes, once fierce and certain, now held questions. What if strength had never been about conquest? What if victory had only been a mask worn by fear? A rustle. Across the stream stood an old man wrapped in a gray cloak, his face hidden beneath the hood. Ryogen's hand instinctively went to his sword. The stranger raised a palm, not in threat, but in greeting. Your weapon is sharp, the man said, voice calm as running water. But your spirit trembles. Ryogen frowned. Who are you? No one, the man replied. And perhaps, that is why I am free. He crossed the stream effortlessly, bare feet silent upon the stones. Tell me, the old man continued, what did you win tonight? Ryogen hesitated. The battle. The stranger smiled faintly. And within you? The question pierced deeper than any wound. Ryogen's jaw tightened. I won nothing. The old man nodded as though he'd expected that answer. Then the war continues, not upon the field, but within the heart. The words stirred something long buried, memories of boyhood lessons ignored, of monks speaking of presence, patience, and breath while he chased power and applause. He had thought their way weak. But now, in the emptiness of his victory, he began to suspect their quiet held a strength his noise had never touched. The stranger sat upon a stone and gestured for Ryogen to do the same. Sit. Listen. To what? To what remains when everything else stops. Ryogen obeyed. At first, all he heard was the wind and the stream. Then, slowly, layers began to peel away, the distant echoes of men laughing, the rhythmic hum of insects, the faint rustle of his own heartbeat. It wasn't silence. It was awareness. The old man spoke softly. You have been trained to cut through men. Now learn to cut through illusion. Ryogen's mind raced. Illusion of what? Control. Pride. The self that fears stillness. The warrior's breath hitched. He realized he had lived every day at war with silence, mistaking motion for progress, victory for meaning. And yet, in this quiet night, with no audience, no reward, he felt closer to truth than ever before. The old man rose. When you can hear the space between sounds, you will begin to see the enemy that lives within you. Before Ryogen could respond, the man turned and walked into the fog. No footsteps, no trace, as though the forest itself had swallowed him. Ryogen sat alone for a long while. The wind moved through the bamboo again, steady, calm, eternal. He listened not as a warrior, but as a student. And in that stillness, he found not weakness, but balance. He stood, the moon now high above, and whispered, not to the night, but to himself, discipline is not silence. Discipline creates silence. He turned back toward the camp, his steps slower, his breath aligned with the rhythm of the earth. The war within had only begun, but for the first time, he was ready to face it. Transition, at dawn, he would return to the camp changed. And the men who once followed his sword would begin to follow his stillness. The road to the monastery wound through a valley of whispering pines. Mist hung low, moving like thought unseen but ever present. Ryogen's footsteps broke the quiet, yet even his own movement seemed unwelcome in this still world. He had followed a rumor carried by merchants and monks alike, there lies a place where the sword no longer cuts, but the man who wielded it still can. They called it the empty dojo, home of a master known only as Isai, the keeper of the still blade. When Ryogen reached the gates, they were already open. No guards. No sign of vigilance. Only the sound of a broom brushing stone. An old man in simple robes swept the courtyard. Each motion was slow, precise, not the labor of cleaning, but of presence. Ryogen stood tall, his blade glinting under the morning sun. I seek the master, he said. The old man did not look up. You have found him. Ryogen bowed stiffly. Then I asked to be taught the still blade. Isai leaned on the broom, studying him. His eyes, calm yet cutting, seemed to pierce through armor and arrogance alike. Before you can wield stillness, he said, you must first survive it. He gestured to a broom resting by the wall. Begin there. Ryogen frowned. You would have me sweep floors? No, Isai replied. I would have you see them. The words struck him as absurd, but he obeyed. Warriors obey until they learn why obedience matters. So Ryujin swept. Morning turned to noon. The courtyard glistened, yet his mind boiled. Every stroke of the broom stirred irritation. Every passing monk, silent and calm, seemed to mock his restlessness. This was not training, this was punishment disguised as patience. When the sun fell behind the ridges, Isai approached. He examined the clean courtyard, nodded once, and said, "The dust will return tomorrow." "What will you do then?" Ryujin wiped his brow. "Sweep again." "Then you are already learning." That night, silence wrapped the monastery like a second skin. No chanting. No lectures. Only the sound of wind threading through bamboo and the steady rhythm of monks breathing in meditation. Ryujin sat apart, restless. His hands twitched for a weapon, for purpose. He had faced hundreds of men in battle, yet this quiet unnerved him more than any blade. At dawn, the monks began their rituals, washing floors, tending gardens, preparing rice. Their movements flowed like water. Each act deliberate, unhurried, whole. He watched, confused. When he asked, "Is this all you do?" one of them smiled. "When you do one thing completely, you have done all things." Days passed. Ryujin's anger dulled into confusion, then into an uneasy calm. He began to notice the small things, the way dust drifted in the morning light, how each breath changed the air, how sound and silence danced like teacher and student. But he did not yet understand their lesson. Until one evening, while the cicadas sang and dusk turned the world to gold, Isai stood before him again. The master's presence was like still water, reflecting everything, revealing nothing. He said only this: "The sword moves as the mind moves." Ryujin froze. Something in those words unraveled him like a knot pulled loose after years of tension. He realized the blade he sought to master was not forged of steel. It was the mind itself. Transition. That night, Ryujin would dream not of war, but of stillness cutting through storm. And when he awoke, training would finally begin. Dawn rose like a whisper over the mountain peaks. Mist rolled through the courtyard, curling around Ryujin's bare feet as he stood facing Master Isai. No sword. No stance. Just breath. Isai's voice broke the stillness, soft, but carrying weight. "You believe the sword is forged by fire," he said. "But it is shaped by stillness." Ryujin bowed slightly, unsure whether to listen or to move. His instincts screamed for action, for proof. He was a man built of motion, of decisive strikes. This quiet, felt like erosion. Isai turned and began to walk the courtyard's perimeter. Ryujin followed. No instruction was given. Only the sound of sandals brushing stone and the distant hum of cicadas. After a long silence, Isai stopped beside a wooden training post, its surface weathered smooth by decades of strikes. He gestured to it. "Strike." Finally, something familiar. Ryujin exhaled, centering himself. He struck once, a clean, powerful blow that echoed through the courtyard. Then again, and again. Each strike filled the air with sound, each impact declaring strength. When he finished, breath heavy, sweat glistening, Isai asked, "Do you hear it?" Ryujin frowned. "Hear what?" "The noise your mind makes while pretending to be still." Confusion flickered into anger. "I struck with focus." "No. You struck with fear, fear of silence, fear of being nothing without movement." Ryujin's chest tightened. Isai's words landed not like accusation, but revelation. He looked at his hands, trembling, restless, desperate to do. Isai stepped forward and placed a finger on the wooden post. "A sword is not moved by muscle," he said. "It is moved by mind. When the mind trembles, so does the blade. When the mind is still, even an unarmed hand can cut." He motioned for Ryujin to sit. Together, they faced the mountains in silence. At first, Ryujin's thoughts thrashed like waves, memories, plans, pride, doubts. He tried to push them away, but they grew louder. Then he remembered Isai's earlier words: "You must first survive stillness." So he did not resist. He let the noise rise and fall, like the tide returning to shore. And gradually, something within him softened. Minutes stretched into hours. Time lost its shape. When Ryujin finally opened his eyes, the mist had lifted, revealing a valley bathed in light. "Master," he whispered, "why does stillness feel heavier than war?" Aisai smiled faintly. "Because war ends when your enemies die. Stillness begins when your illusions do." The truth of it settled deep in Ryujin's chest. He had spent his life conquering men but had never dared to confront his own chaos. Here, in this quiet dojo, he was finally facing it, and it terrified him. That evening, as lanterns flickered against the wooden walls, Aisai handed him a simple wooden sword. "Tomorrow," he said, "we train again. But not to strike. To listen." Ryujin took the weapon in both hands. It was light, almost meaningless compared to the steel he once carried. Yet as he held it, he felt a strange gravity. It wasn't the weight of the weapon, but of awareness. In that moment, he understood, patience was not the absence of movement. It was the control that allowed movement to serve purpose. As the wind passed through the open doors of the dojo, the flames of the lanterns did not waver. They burned steady, like minds at peace with their own stillness. And for the first time, Ryujin felt that same steadiness rising within him. Transition: at sunrise, the dojo would echo again, not with strikes of steel, but with the rhythm of breath learning to guide the blade. The dojo was silent. No wind, no movement, only the faint drip of water from the eaves, marking time like a patient heartbeat. Ryujin sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, eyes closed, breath slow. Master Aisai's voice drifted through the stillness like smoke. "Today, we look inward. The blade is not forged in fire, but in fear." Ryujin's body obeyed the stillness, but his mind refused. Behind his closed eyes, memory stirred faces, screams, blood, the glint of steel under a dying sun. The ghosts he'd buried rose in silence. He tried to focus on breath. Inhale. Exhale. But each breath seemed to carry a whisper, words from men he'd slain, words from the boy he once was. "You kill to be seen. You fight to forget." His pulse quickened. The floor beneath him felt unstable, shifting like sand. He opened his eyes. The dojo had darkened, though the lanterns still burned. The walls seemed to breathe. And there, in front of him, stood a figure. Armor scarred. Eyes hollow. Sword drawn. It was himself. The mirror of his fear, not an illusion, but a reflection shaped by every choice he'd made. He reached for his wooden blade, but Aisai's voice cut through the air. "Do not strike. Observe." Ryujin hesitated. His reflection moved closer, sword raised. Every instinct screamed to defend, to fight, to prove strength through motion. But he remembered, the sword moves as the mind moves. So he stood still. The phantom halted inches away, its blade trembling. Ryujin met its gaze, and saw not rage, but terror. It wasn't a warrior before him. It was the child who once trembled in the dark, clutching a wooden stick, vowing never to be powerless again. He lowered his stance. "I know you," he whispered. "You are why I fought. You are why I never stopped." The reflection sword lowered slightly. Its breath echoed his own, shallow, uneven, human. Aisai's voice again, distant but clear: "Fear is not the enemy, Ryujin. It is the first teacher, the one all warriors abandon too soon." Ryujin closed his eyes once more. He inhaled deeply. When he opened them, the phantom had stepped back. The two figures, the man and his shadow, now breathed together. "Stand with fear," Aisai said softly, "until it bows." Ryujin felt his heartbeat slow. He didn't need to defeat the image, he only needed to understand it. The phantom nodded, and then, like mist before sunrise, it dissolved. The dojo returned to stillness. Only his breath remained, steady and quiet. Ryujin bowed his head. He felt lighter, not from victory, but from release. Fear had not been destroyed, it had been seen. When he opened his eyes, Aisai was standing beside him, hands folded behind his back. You faced the mirror and did not look away, the master said. That is the beginning of true strength. Ryujin looked at the space where his reflection had stood and whispered, I understand now. The battle was never out there. The master nodded. No. It never was. Transition. That night, as the moon reflected perfectly in the still water of the temple pond, Ryujin realized, clarity comes when the storm inside finally learns to listen. Morning arrived, soundless pale light spilling across the dojo floor like water through cracked stone. Ryujin remained seated where the night had left him. The air felt different now. Lighter. Honest. He had not defeated his fear, he had met it, and for the first time, it had met him without disguise. Master Isai approached, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one before Ryujin and sat opposite. Neither spoke for a while. The sound of the tea steaming between them was enough. At last, Isai said, when a man refuses to see his fear, it commands him. When he sees it clearly, it becomes his servant. Ryujin nodded slowly, though part of him still trembled at the memory of the phantom he had faced. Master, he said quietly, I thought fear was weakness. It made me kill faster, strike harder. I thought if I drowned it, I would be free. Isai's gaze was steady, compassionate yet cutting. You cannot drown what lives in air. Fear is not a chain, it is breath. Learn its rhythm, and it will move with you. The master lifted his cup, sipped, and set it down again. Do you remember your first battle? Ryujin's eyes darkened. Yes. Then tell me, what did you feel? Everything, he admitted. Terror. Rage. Excitement. I wanted to run, but I forced my body forward. And what carried you through? He paused. The moment I accepted I would die. Isai smiled faintly. Exactly. Fear showed you truth. Not death, but presence. In that instant, you were alive without distraction. Ryujin looked down at his reflection in the tea, calm now, no longer fragmented. Then fear is not to be slain, he murmured. It is to be studied. To be befriended, Isai corrected. To bow before it until it bows in return. Outside, the wind stirred the temple's wind chimes, and their tone carried like distant bells, not mournful, but awakening. Isai rose and gestured toward the open courtyard. Come. Ryujin followed. The morning sun had burned away the mist, revealing a clarity he hadn't noticed before. Every stone, every shadow seemed sharper. At the center of the courtyard stood a basin of water. Isai pointed to it. Look. Ryujin leaned forward. His reflection stared back, whole, unbroken. When fear controls you, Isai said, the water ripples. Your mind becomes distorted, your vision fractured. When you stand with fear and breathe through it, the water calms, and so does the world. Ryujin watched as the breeze passed over the basin. Tiny ripples formed, then settled. He sought his reflection reappear, steady, unmoving. Awareness, said Isai, is the mirror that no longer shatters. The words resonated through Ryujin's chest. He realized his life had been a series of ripples, every ambition, every victory born not from peace, but panic. He had mistaken motion for mastery. Noise for clarity. But now, beneath the surface of silence, he began to see himself clearly for the first time. He turned to Isai. Master, what comes after fear? Isai smiled. Freedom. But not the kind you can hold. Freedom that breathes. That acts without hesitation. When fear bows, action becomes pure. Ryujin bowed deeply, forehead touching the earth. He felt no shame, only release. When he stood, he noticed something profound. The world hadn't changed. Only the way he saw it had. The old master watched him quietly, then said, the warrior who befriends fear cannot be defeated, because he no longer fights shadows. Ryujin looked toward the horizon, the same mountains that had once seemed so far, so unreachable. Now they looked like teachers waiting patiently for his next lesson. Transition. Tomorrow, Isai would place a sword in Ryujin's hands again, not to fight the world, but to see if his spirit could now move without trembling. Morning mist draped the dojo like a veil. Lanterns flickered in the half-light, their glow caught between breath and dawn. Ryujin stood in the center of the courtyard, wooden sword in hand. His heart was calm, his stance grounded, yet something within him trembled, not from fear, but anticipation. Master Isai approached with the same unhurried grace that had come to define him. His robe brushed against the stone with the sound of wind passing through grass. He carried no weapon, only the serenity of someone who needed none. Today, he said, you will learn Zanshin. Awareness before, during, and after the strike. Ryujin bowed. Is this another lesson in stillness? No, Isai replied. This is movement that remembers stillness. He motioned for Ryujin to raise his sword. The air thickened with focus. You have fought to control every breath, Isai said. Now, you must release control. The moment you chase awareness, you lose it. He circled Ryujin slowly. When you breathe, the world breathes. When you strike, the world strikes through you. There is no separation, only rhythm. Ryujin inhaled, sharp, deliberate. He swung once. The motion was clean, but rigid. The air split, yet the silence afterward felt wrong. Isai shook his head gently. You still seek perfection. But perfection is the shadow of fear, it hides the truth of flow. Ryujin tried again. Each movement, though precise, carried the faint tremor of intention, a will that wanted to achieve. And in wanting, he broke the rhythm. Isai stepped closer. You are trying to breathe for the strike. You must let the strike breathe through you. Ryujin paused, confused. How can a strike breathe? Through stillness that moves, Isai said. Through awareness that does not grasp. He took the sword from Ryujin's hand and performed a single motion. It was nothing spectacular, a simple downward cut. Yet in that instant, time seemed to suspend. The blade moved with the grace of falling rain, no force, no effort, only inevitability. The sound of the strike was soft, yet it resonated through the courtyard like thunder restrained. Ryujin felt it more than he saw it. Presence, pure and unbroken, radiated from that single motion. How did you do that? He whispered. Isai returned the sword. By doing nothing unnecessary. Ryujin stood in silence. He realized he had spent years chasing mastery, never realizing it was the chase itself that kept him from it. The next hour unfolded without words. Ryujin moved, breathed, observed. Each swing became less deliberate, more alive. He stopped correcting himself. He stopped thinking. And as the morning sun climbed higher, something inside him shifted. His breath found rhythm not through effort, but surrender. His movements began to echo the wind, invisible, yet undeniably present. The dojo no longer felt like a place of practice, but a mirror reflecting the state of his own being. For a fleeting moment, he disappeared, not vanished, but dissolved. Only the movement remained. The line between man, breath, and blade blurred into one seamless gesture. When the motion ended, Ryujin stood still, exhaling softly. The silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt infinite. Isai smiled faintly. You are beginning to remember. Ryujin lowered his head. Remember what? That presence was never lost. Only forgotten. Transition, that evening, as wind swept through the courtyard and lanterns bowed in unison, Ryujin understood stillness was not the opposite of motion. It was motion, mastered. Night descended upon the monastery like ink poured over glass. Crickets whispered in the reeds, and the faint hum of cicadas merged with the rhythm of Ryujin's breathing. He sat cross-legged beneath the old cedar tree that watched over the dojo, a sentinel of centuries. The day's training had drained his body but awakened something deeper, a listening. He heard the space between sounds. He felt the air move before it touched his skin. It was as though the world had slowed to reveal its pulse, not a rhythm of clocks, but of consciousness. Master Isai's voice emerged from the dark. When a warrior breathes without awareness, he becomes noise. When he breathes with awareness, he becomes harmony. Ryujin opened his eyes. Harmony with what? With everything that moves without trying. The wind sighed through the courtyard as if answering. Ryujin closed his eyes again, following the breeze through his nostrils, his lungs, his blood. Every breath expanded into an ocean. Every exhale released a storm. Icei stepped closer. Now stand. Ryujin rose, his movements fluid. Draw your sword, Icei said. The blade glimmered in moonlight, quiet, alive. Strike, but not to hit. Strike to listen. Ryujin swung. The blade cut through the night. No resistance. No echo. Only awareness. In that motion, he felt it, not the force of muscle, but the grace of intention released. Icei nodded. That is Zanshin. Not the strike, but the awareness that lingers after it. It is the breath that remains when all motion ceases. Ryujin stood motionless, breath hovering in the air. He sensed it now, that the moment after the strike was not an ending, but continuation. Awareness did not stop with action, it expanded through it. He sheathed his sword. The soft click of metal against scabbard echoed like a bell. Sensei, Ryujin said, I feel as though I'm not the one moving. Because you're not, Icei replied. When the ego disappears, movement becomes truth. You were never meant to control the breath, only to become it. They stood in silence. The moon climbed higher, silvering the stones beneath their feet. A stillness filled the space, not empty, but vast, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Then Icei spoke again, softly, there is a breath before every strike, and another after. Between them lies eternity. Master that, and you master life itself. Ryujin bowed deeply. The gesture felt different now, no longer a performance of respect, but an act of surrender. Days turned to weeks. He trained without seeking progress. Each swing became prayer. Each inhale, devotion. Each exhale, release. He stopped chasing silence and started hearing it everywhere. In the crackle of the fire, in the footsteps of monks, in his own heartbeat. Silence was no longer an absence, it was the field in which everything moved. One morning, while sparring alone, he caught sight of his reflection in a basin of water. The surface rippled with each breath, but the reflection held steady. He smiled faintly. He had found what he had never been looking for, the breath between strikes. Zanshin, he whispered. Awareness that endures. From that moment, the sword was no longer a weapon, it was a mirror. Each cut revealed the invisible boundary between presence and distraction. And with every breath, that boundary faded a little more. As the temple bell rang, echoing across the valley, Icei's voice drifted through the courtyard once more. When you master the breath, you master time. Ryujin closed his eyes. The world inhaled. The world exhaled. And between those two breaths, he disappeared into presence. Transition, at dawn, Icei would give him a new task, not to strike, not to still, but to see. And thus began Chapter 5, The Eye Within the Storm. The horizon burned with the color of ash. Banners fluttered in a wind that smelled of iron and earth. Once again, the world had chosen war. Ryujin stood at its edge, watching soldiers form ranks, faces painted, hearts trembling behind armor. The sound of drums rolled through the valley like thunder chasing its own echo. He felt it all, the noise, the fear, the tremor in the ground, yet inside him, there was only stillness. Years had passed since the monastery. His hair now carried streaks of silver, his hands the calluses of a life spent learning the shape of silence. Where once he had fought to prove his strength, now he stood not as a conqueror, but as a mirror. Master Icei's words lingered like the scent of cedar smoke, the breath you control becomes the life you preserve. He inhaled slowly. The battlefield expanded and contracted with his lungs, not as chaos, but as rhythm. Men shouted. Arrows whistled. Horses screamed. But in the space between each sound, he heard the eternal hum, the soundless pulse of existence. An enemy charged. Ryujin stepped forward. No anger. No haste. Only breath. Steel met steel, but to Ryujin, it was not a clash, only a continuation of motion. He parried effortlessly, his sword moving as if drawn by unseen currents. The other warrior stumbled, bewildered. It was as if Ryujin had vanished between his own movements. How? The man gasped. You struck with fear, Ryujin replied. Fear makes noise. His blade swept once more, gentle as wind through reeds. The enemy's sword fell from his hands, untouched, yet defeated. Ryujin did not press forward. He stepped back, allowing silence to reclaim the moment. To kill would have been easier than to see. And Ryujin saw the trembling of the man's breath, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He bowed slightly and walked past. Around him, the battle raged. Yet within him, the air was still. He remembered the courtyard, the cedar tree, the whisper of Aisai's teaching. The sword moves as the mind moves. Now, his mind moved like water, formless, patient, inevitable. He weaved through the chaos like a shadow shaped by grace. Every strike he deflected felt like a conversation, not a confrontation. He fought not to win, but to remain whole, to ensure that the silence within him survived the storm outside. At one point, a young soldier, barely older than a boy, stumbled before him. His armor was too heavy, his hands trembling too hard to grip the sword. Ryujin met his eyes, and in that gaze, something softened. The boy lowered his weapon. Ryujin nodded once and passed him by. That single act, restraint, carried more power than 1,000 victories. Arrows rained. The sky darkened. Yet to Ryujin, time no longer held its dominion. Every arrow in flight, every heartbeat in reach, felt contained within one breath, vast, eternal, unbroken. He could sense the rhythm of the entire field. Each motion, every scream, strike, and silence folded into one grand pattern. It was not war anymore. It was movement. And in that movement, he heard the echo of his own stillness, clear, unwavering, infinite. When his sword finally came to rest, the battlefield was quiet. Not because the war was over, but because his mind was. He looked to the horizon. Smoke rose like incense. The wind carried both sorrow and peace. And Ryujin whispered, almost to the air itself, the true battle is already won. Transition, as dusk descended, he turned from the battlefield toward the mountains, toward silence. And with each step, the sound of war faded behind him like a dream. Dusk gave way to night. The fires of battle flickered like dying stars behind him, but Ryujin did not look back. Each step he took away from war was a step into himself, the sound of his sandals on earth, the rhythm of a man who had outlived noise. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks silvered by moonlight. It was there, among the silence of stone and wind, that he finally stopped. He unbuckled his armor piece by piece until the last plate fell to the ground with a muted thud. It sounded like liberation. The wind swept through the valley, cold and honest. He stood bare against it, feeling the weight of years dissolve into the air. The sword hung at his side, yet it no longer felt like a weapon, only a memory of motion. He unsheathed it once more, not to strike, but to see. The blade reflected the moon clear, calm, endless. For the first time, he saw not himself in the reflection, but everything else, the stars, the clouds, the gentle breath of the night. So this, he whispered, is what the still blade truly is. Not steel. Not discipline. But presence undisturbed, unbroken, infinite. A soft rustle echoed behind him. Master Aisai stood there, robes flowing like smoke, as if he had stepped from the mountain itself. Ryujin did not turn in surprise, he only bowed. Sensei. I thought you had long passed. Aisai's eyes glimmered like candlelight. I never left. A true master walks wherever his student breathes. They stood together in silence, the kind that speaks louder than sound. You have learned the final lesson, Aisai said. But tell me, what is it you have learned? Ryujin's voice was quiet but steady. That victory is not the absence of defeat, it is the absence of self. When the mind stops fighting, even death loses its edge. Aisai smiled faintly. Then you understand. The sword was only a mirror. And what it reflected was never the enemy, but the noise within. The master stepped closer, placing a hand on Ryujin's shoulder. You sought to master the sword. But the sword was only asking you to master the breath. The breath leads to awareness. Awareness leads to peace. And peace leads back to the beginning. The words lingered in the cool air. Ryujin nodded slowly. He looked once more at his blade, then lowered it into the earth, tip first. The metal sank quietly into soil and shadow. He turned his palms upward, empty. For the first time, they did not tremble. A single breath filled the valley, his, yet not his alone. It carried the scent of cedar, rain, and distant fire, the world breathing itself alive. Ryujin closed his eyes. There was no separation now between air and skin, between heartbeat and wind. Only the rhythm that had always been there, waiting beneath the noise. And in that rhythm, he felt Isai fade, not vanish, but merge with everything. The old master's voice drifted through the silence one last time. The warrior who knows peace no longer carries a sword, he carries presence. When Ryujin opened his eyes, dawn was rising. The first light brushed across the mountains, painting gold upon stone. He smiled, not as a man who had conquered, but as one who had remembered. He bowed to the sun, to the wind, to the breath itself. Then, turning toward the horizon, he walked each step silent, yet resounding with eternity. Final transition, the battlefield was gone, the noise forgotten, the sword at rest. Only the still blade remained, not in his hand, but in his heart. When the mind is still, even chaos becomes your ally.